Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Lucian was stressing over Roxanne's emotional fluctuations in the last few days. She kept going from being angry to breaking down and then finding some relief, only to go back to being angry again in a vicious cycle. He was afraid that she wouldn't be able to handle it anymore. Thus, he left her at home and went to the police station himself to urge them to speed up the process. Fortunately, the arrest warrant was officially issued, and 4 police officers went to the suburban villa to bring Winnie back to the police station. As Winnie was only considered a suspect in the case and was required to cooperate with the investigation, they could only hold Winnie for 24 hours. At the police station, Winnie was completely unafraid and full of arrogance. When she spotted Lucian but didn't see Roxanne, she smirked coldly. You can't just pin any charges on me without evidence. Go ahead and investigate all you want. It doesn't matter to me." Even the police officers were angered by Winnie's arrogance, and they took her to the interrogation room with stern expressions. Lucian waited at the door. When Bill came out, he shook his head slightly, his expression serious. According to the forensic report, Ms. Jarvis' mother had been suffering from the illness for 3 years. In other words, she had been exposed to mercury very early on. Based on the time of death, Winnie forced Grant to divorce Ms. Jarvis' mother and entered the Jarvis family a year after the illness began. That means there's a 1-year interval between the 2 events. Lucian's expression turned grim as he pondered over the words. After a few seconds, he asked, maybe Winnie had already set her sights on my mother-in-law from the beginning and secretly poisoned her early on?" Bill shook his head and refuted that statement. Miss Jarvis mentioned her mother's normal daily routine yesterday. Her mother was always at home taking care of the family and would have been alerted to any strange behavior from random women. I was also considering whether Grant helped Winnie do this, but if that were the case, he would have shown remorse and mentioned it before his death. Lucian believed this too. Grant's behavior before his death was indeed remorseful. However, the fact that he took his own life is perplexing. Was he helping Winnie to keep the secret? This whole case is becoming more and more confusing. Why is Winnie so arrogant and fearless? Don't tell me it's really because we won't be able to find any evidence. Bill muttered suddenly, You should try to get Ms. Jarvis to remember more about what happened. We can see if her mother had any unusual behavior back then." Lucian nodded. Mr. Chapman, I'll go back and talk to Roxanne again. You don't have to overwork yourself. Please rest more. Thank you very much for your help." Don't worry, I'm going to watch how these brats conduct their interrogation next. Who knows, maybe I'll find something, Bill said. He waved to Lucian before immediately heading back into the police station. When Lucian returned to the Farwell residence, he saw his wife anxiously waiting in the living room. Roxanne was trying to control her emotions and relax her mind so that she could get a good night's sleep. Despite that, no matter how much she tried not to think about it, her mother's suffering back then filled her mind. How could she relax? How did it go? Did the police find any clues? She asked eagerly when she saw her husband come in. Lucian tried to choose his words carefully, not wanting to see his wife's mood sour again. He smiled and said, Winnie has been arrested and is being interrogated now. Mr. Chapman is an experienced detective who can often break through the psychological defenses of criminals in critical moments, so we'll just have to see how tough Winnie is." When Roxanne heard that, her tense mood relaxed slightly. Following Bill's instructions, Lucian asked her about his mother-in-law's life before her illness. At that, Roxanne struggled to remember. She had been only 5 or 6 years old at the time, and her memories were very vague. She only remembered that her mother had been ill for a long time, but she always smiled sweetly when Roxanne came home from kindergarten. Her mother had also made her all sorts of delicious food. Moreover, her mother loved flowers and had many potted plants that filled up the entire yard. This led to young Roxanne feeling like the scent of flowers always surrounded her during her childhood. At that time, Grant had just started his business and had built a small factory. He would often travel around and bring Roxanne back small items and snacks from different places. He also gave her mother many gifts, such as clothes and jewelry. Her parents were very loving to each other, and Roxanne felt so happy. But then, for some reason, her parents started arguing frequently, and it only grew worse and worse. Her mother's sadness and anger were of no use. Grant would just break things and leave the house, leaving a mess behind. The young Roxanne could only hide in her room, trembling in fear. She worried that Grant would hurt her mother, but fortunately he didn't. Roxanne didn't know what agreement her parents eventually reached, but suddenly, they stopped arguing. Her mother became busier and started going out every 2 or 3 days, leaving Roxanne alone at home. Although things had calmed down, her mother smiled less and less, and her eyes were always full of sadness. Sometimes, she would hug Roxanne and silently shed tears. That was when her mother began to fall ill. Looking back, those were probably the symptoms of mercury poisoning that had begun to appear. When Roxanne saw her mother's frail condition, she felt sad as well. Maybe that was when Roxanne's desire to become a doctor began to take root in her heart. Her mother's illness quickly worsened that year, and eventually, she was bedridden. Many household chores fell on the young girl's shoulders. Her father rarely showed up, and she took care of her mother while trying not to worry her, all while still going to school. Her mother became increasingly depressed and would often cry uncontrollably. Roxanne didn't understand at the time, but she did hold her mother tightly and shared in her pain. Those were truly difficult times. But then, out of nowhere, Grant showed up with Winnie and her 2 kids, Joseph and Juliana. Suddenly, Roxanne had a new younger brother and sister. The entire situation completely shocked and angered her mother, which led to a huge argument between her parents. During the argument, Roxanne heard the word a divorce, but her mother refused to consider it, which led to Winnie hurling insults at her. Before this, Grant had been giving them some money, but this suddenly stopped. Hence, Roxanne's mother had to sell everything of value to keep Roxanne in school and maintain a normal life. What they didn't expect was for the illness to last for 3 long years, as it tormented her mother until the very end. In the end, her mother passed away. After that, Grant forcibly took Roxanne to a villa unfamiliar to her. Less than a year later, Grant and Winnie shamelessly held a wedding with only a few close friends as witnesses because they didn't dare to invite many guests. The memories ended there. However, Roxanne was deeply trapped in grief and couldn't pull herself out of it. A darling, darling. Lucian called her several times before she slowly came back to reality. Her tears were about to flow again. My mother had such a hard life, honey. If I don't avenge her, I'll be failing her as her daughter. In the police station, Bill drank double the coffee to stay awake and had the officers take Winnie back to the holding cell, stopping the interrogation. He then questioned the 2 officers in charge of the interrogation, but the results were disappointing. Winnie had an incredibly strong mental fortitude. No matter how they interrogated her, her expression remained calm. Bill had been observing her pupils during the interrogation, but still got nothing. I've seen this type of suspect before. They've been doing this for too many years, so their conscience and morals have been numbed. They constantly self-hypnotize themselves with a clean memory to suppress the truth. That's how they can appear so calm during an interrogation. They truly don't think they've done anything wrong. Bill explained to the young officers. He then added, of course, we can't wrongly accuse anyone. If we don't have any new evidence by tomorrow, we'll have to let her go. Both officers nodded. One of them asked, if time is of the essence, why did we suddenly stop the interrogation? Bill checked his watch and nodded. It's 1 in the morning now. Let's give her 2 hours of rest before we launch another interrogation. At that time, she should be at her most exhausted state, and it'll perhaps lead to a breakthrough. Realization dawned on the 2 officers. If the suspect was on guard, the interrogation would be ineffective no matter what methods they used. Bill had no plans to sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, Bill and the 2 officers were all yawning, but the interrogation record in the case file gave no valuable leads. They had hoped the interrogation would reveal some flaws in Winnie's story, which they could use to find evidence. Unfortunately, it seemed that plan wasn't working. Mr. Chapman, when it's time to hand things over to the afternoon shift, we might have to release her, one of the officers said. Bill nodded. We have to follow the law. It is what it is. As this was not good news, Bill hesitated for a few minutes before finally calling Lucian to tell him about it. Lucian had just woken up, and on the phone, they discussed some details that Roxanne had remembered from the night before. What was Miss Jarvis' mother doing when she was frequently out for a long time? This is very suspicious. Bill captured the key point at once. Lucian had noted this as well the night before. He had asked Roxanne, but she didn't know anything about it. Mr. Farwell, have Miss Jarvis try to remember more details. Maybe she can recall some important memories. I will talk to the forensic team today and see if we can find any other clues, Bill said quickly before hanging up without giving Lucian a chance to thank him. Meanwhile, Roxanne had just dropped off the 3 kids at school and returned home. When she saw her husband's worried expression, she managed to smile and said softly, I can't be so panicked anymore. Maybe if I calm down, I can remember more details. Lucian nodded and walked up to her, hugging her tightly. As Roxanne savored the warmth of her husband's embrace, she felt safe and secure. Isn't tomorrow the day of Madeline's wedding? I'm not in a rush anymore. After all, Winnie can't possibly disappear into thin air. I'll help Madeline celebrate her big day first, as she murmured to herself. That afternoon, Frida, Jonathan's younger sister, rushed back from the north. Jonathan and Madeline went to the airport to pick her up. It had been a long time since Jonathan had seen his sister, so he was a little stunned when he finally saw her. Even Madeline, who had only met Frida a few times before, noticed how much weight she had lost. However, Frida didn't look haggard. Instead, she exuded an aura like that of a sophisticated woman. When Frida saw Madeline, she immediately smiled and ran over to embrace her. Hey, Madeline. I'm sorry for coming back so late. The project was at a critical stage, so I had to be there. Madeline was taken aback by how tight Frida's embrace was and didn't know whether to reciprocate. After a few seconds of hesitation, she patted Frida's back lightly and said, It's okay. We're just glad you're home. Everyone will be very happy to see you. Jonathan was a little puzzled by the enthusiastic hug. He then noticed his sister rolling her eyes at him. Jonathan, you finally made the right choice and chose Madeline. You weren't seduced by Coralie in the end. Jonathan didn't know what to say. That was a long time ago. He was a little surprised by the change in his sister's personality. She seems brighter than before and less narrow-minded. What had happened to her during her time in the north? Is her relationship with Sean doomed to fail? There were many questions swirling in Jonathan's mind, but he didn't rush to ask them. Frida turned to Madeline and praised her. Madeline, you're so beautiful and kind. Besides, you're a doctor who saves lives. My brother is so lucky to have you. Madeline blushed at the compliments and quickly waved them off. No, I'm not that great. Frida nodded emphatically and then mentioned that she had checked in many things and needed to retrieve them. I brought you guys a lot of wedding gifts. I've basically bought all the good things in the north. There are even some supplements that can help with the early conception of a child. Frida's personality transformation had turned her into a completely different person. In the past, she wasn't this lively to cause both Jonathan and Madeline to blush. She had brought so many things back that they couldn't fit all of them into the trunk of the car and had to place some in the back seat. When the 3 of them returned to the Queen residence, Lucian and Roxanne had also arrived. Roxanne was also surprised by Frida's change. However, Frida seemed to have forgotten everything from the past as she chatted with Roxanne very naturally. Roxanne, I'm doing well in Horba now. I'm also in the medicinal herb business, but most of them are cultured herbs. By the way, if your pharmaceutical company has plans to set up an agency in each state, can I fight for the spot in Horba? Roxanne was surprised by Frida's business acumen. She considered Frida's proposal and nodded. This matter will need to be decided by the board of directors. But if there is such a plan, I will definitely support you. Frida smiled happily, rummaged through her pile of gifts, and finally took out a long box before handing it to Roxanne. Roxanne, this is a tonic that I had a hard time finding. My mother told me you're pregnant, so you can use it to nourish your body after childbirth. Roxanne looked at her husband, stunned. Lucian smiled and nodded. Take it. Frida means well, after all. Soon James and Electra came to help as well. James' personality had also changed a lot since Yennefer began to recover. He was no longer the dull and serious person he used to be. He appeared a bit carefree and foolish now. He playfully punched Jonathan as soon as he arrived. We agreed to be single together, but you secretly got married. That's not fair. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. If you want to get married, just say the word and there will be women lining up from the city square to the outskirts, no? You said it yourself. Really? When did I say something so arrogant? Ha ha ha. James laughed it off. Then he came to Lucian and Roxanne and immediately put away his carefree attitude. He asked with concern, Lucian, Roxanne, is there anything I can help with? He was referring to Roxanne's mother's situation. Roxanne shook her head. Even the police haven't found a breakthrough yet, so we can't rush it. Thank you for your kind intentions though, James. Lucian narrowed his eyes and glanced at his wife. Perhaps James can really help. Don't forget that he's been studying psychology. He should at least know hypnosis. If we can hypnotize Winnie, maybe we can get her to talk. James nodded. He certainly knew his own abilities when he offered to help. Roxanne was a little surprised. She had to admit that she hadn't thought that far and hadn't considered this possibility. She couldn't help but feel a little excited. Maybe we can really do it this way. The key is, how do we get Winnie to be hypnotized? Roxanne pondered aloud. Lucian and James smiled at each other. Being nice all the time may not always be the best way. Sometimes one has to take drastic actions. Nevertheless, they didn't say it outright. Right then, Electra finished chatting with Jonathan and Madeline. She came over to say hello. Lucian, I noticed that Roxanne doesn't look well. Is she too tired? After she finished speaking to Lucian, she shifted her gaze to Roxanne and said with a caring tone, Roxanne, you're pregnant now. Don't overwork yourself. Okay. Thank you for your concern, Roxanne replied politely. Is it just me or Electra is standing very close to James? The way they're standing seems to suggest that they have an intimate relationship. Did Electra suddenly change her mind and fall in love with James? Roxanne came up with a wild guess all of a sudden. But it doesn't seem like a bad thing. As long as Electra doesn't continue to have feelings for Lucian, anything is fine. After some small talk, Electra suddenly took out an eye cream and personally tried it on Roxanne, saying that it could quickly eliminate eye bags. Roxanne felt the warmth around her eye bags and knew that it was accelerating blood circulation, thereby achieving the effect of a warm pack. She smiled and instructed James, record this down for me. Flora Verba Group will immediately research and develop this eye cream. James immediately put on a serious attitude when he heard that a new product was coming out. He listened attentively to the important instructions of the chairman of the company. Roxanne gave a brief introduction to the underlying principles of the eye cream, explaining that it was not difficult to develop and the research institute could probably get it done in a week. As they chatted, the conversation shifted to business matters. Madeline came over and complained about it, then dragged Roxanne and Electra upstairs to show them Estella's wedding dress. When Madeline showed them the wedding dress, Roxanne was a little envious. Likewise, Electra couldn't take her eyes off it. Estella used a lot of velvet in her design this time and combined it with smooth lines. The skirt had a slightly fluffy look, like a white swan about to take off and like an angel descending from the heavens. Madeline's figure had always been good, but this wedding dress made her look even more graceful and regal. It's so beautiful. Estella has really lived up to her role as your goddaughter." Roxanne praised Estella sincerely. My daughter is amazing." This made Madeline ask her playfully to focus on her, the bride, instead. Electra was surprised to learn that Estella had designed the dress and couldn't speak for a long time. "So, this is a one-of-a-kind wedding dress in the world. Ms. Xander, it's perfect on you." Electra also praised without hesitation. Madeline was quite pleased in her heart when she heard the praises and had a sweet smile on her lips. She simply didn't want to take off the dress after putting it on. However, considering that there was still some time before the wedding ceremony officially started, she had no choice but to take it off carefully. After everyone hung around for a while longer, Jonathan asked them to go back and rest well as they would be busy later. Roxanne, go home and rest. I know you have a lot going on lately, but I hope my wedding can bring you some joy. Sleep well, and when you wake up, I still need you to do my hair." Madeline's tone was full of tender concern. When she woke up this morning and learned about the updated situation from Jonathan, she was so angry that she wanted to fight with Winnie. Fortunately, Jonathan persuaded her to focus on completing the wedding ceremony first. Roxanne nodded and hugged Madeline before leaving the Queen residence. Upon returning to the Farwell residence, Lucian took her to the room to rest. Knowing that she probably couldn't sleep well, he even gave her a hand massage to help her relax. Roxanne slept from the afternoon until the middle of the night. The entire time, she could feel the warmth of Lucian's body behind her and his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. The children were picked up by their grandparents and were very well behaved. They did not make any noise but simply finished their homework, read, and did what they liked. When Roxanne woke up, she checked the time and saw that it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. Lucian was already washing up, so Roxanne got up quickly. She had to make sure that her best friend's wedding started smoothly at the right time. This time, they drove straight to the bride's house. The villa was brightly lit, and many figures could be seen busy rushing around. After helping Lorraine with some things, Henrietta rushed back to the Queen residence and helped with the preparation. Yennefer had also come to help Lorraine. When Lucian and Roxanne arrived, Lorraine had a smile on her face. Finally, you two are here. Roxanne, hurry up. The bride is waiting for her hair to be done." Roxanne nodded and went straight upstairs to her best friend's room. Like her own wedding, they started with the traditional wedding customs. All the tools for hairstyling were already in place. Essentially, Roxanne helping her friend style her hair was very meaningful according to tradition. After all, this was traditionally something that the mother of the bride would do, but Madeline had insisted on having Roxanne do it. Roxanne started to style Madeline's hair seriously, coiling it up into a neat updo and inserting hairpins to hold it in place. Madeline looked at Roxanne's serious expression in the mirror and suddenly exclaimed, Roxanne, I am really so thankful for you in my life." What are you talking about? Don't be so sentimental. You're the most beautiful bride today and you should be happy, Roxanne said sincerely. Suddenly, she remembered something and stopped what she was doing. She took out a document from her bag and added, "Oh, by the way, I promised to give you a big gift. Here are 5% of Flora Verba Group's shares. It will take effect immediately after you sign it." Madeline was stunned by Roxanne's casual tone. 5%. The current valuation of Flora Verba Group has already exceeded hundreds of billions. It's like giving away 5 billion just like that. Roxanne is just too generous. Madeline didn't dare to accept such a huge gift. It was just too expensive. Roxanne chuckled. Just sign it quickly. Don't worry, I've backdated it to before you and Jonathan got married, so it counts as your premarital asset. This way, you won't feel inferior when you marry into the Queen family in the future. Do you understand? Roxanne had been in the same situation before. When she first married Lucian, she often felt inferior and insignificant because his family was more powerful. She gave Madeline these shares to ensure that Madeline would feel relaxed when facing her in-laws in the future. Moreover, Madeline was an important part of Flora Verba Group. She was responsible for the hospital business, which was actually the most arduous one. After much persuasion, Madeline finally signed and agreed to accept the gift. When Lorraine heard about the gift worth $5 billion, she was shocked. She quickly waved her hand and said, No, we really can't accept it. Roxanne, my daughter, and I have already owed you too much." Roxanne didn't bother to explain and simply told her that it was an internal matter of Flora Verba Group and she didn't need to worry about it. Lorraine had no choice but to keep quiet. However, her eyes were filled with gratitude as she looked at Roxanne. At dawn, the convoy of luxury cars began to depart from the Queen residence. Lucian was driving the first limited edition Rolls-Royce with Jonathan sitting next to him, and Jonathan's parents, Zachary and Henrietta, in the back. This was the first time Lucian had driven as the groom's driver. James and Electra were in the second car with James' father, Jones, and Electra's father, Richard. The two elders were chatting away, while James and Electra didn't say much to each other. Soon, the conversation turned to their children. Lucian got married early, and now even Jonathan is married. "We're getting behind," Jones said to Richard with a laugh. That's right. You two should work on this. You're not getting any younger," Richard muttered to the two young people in front. James smiled and said, Mr. Lane, I'm not in a hurry. I'm enjoying this beautiful world with a relaxed state of mind. Marriage is not something I'm concerned about right now." This earned him a cold look from Jones. Electra, likewise, retorted, Dad, can't you see that both Lucian and Jonathan have successful careers, while Roxanne and Miss Xander are career women too? I need to work hard to achieve something in my career first. I'm not interested in marriage at all yet." Richard could only shake his head helplessly. "We have enough money at home, but these young people just want to go out and work. If you two still haven't found anyone in 2 years, you might as well get together," Jones said jokingly. Richard was taken aback for a moment, then he smiled and replied, Hey, that's not a bad idea. We both know each other well. James and Electra grew up together too. It might just work." James immediately protested, Dad, Mr. Lane, don't start playing matchmaker. I'm not Electra's type at all, and I don't like a girl like her either." He then tilted his head and stuck his tongue out at Electra. In the past, Electra would have immediately retorted and teased James, saying she didn't find him worthy of her either. But this time, she just smiled slightly and didn't argue. Keep your eyes on the road, James." She tried to change the subject to hide her emotions. As the wedding day progressed, Jonathan and Madeline began to feel the brunt of the hectic schedule and complained non-stop. After all, neither of them knew weddings would be so tiring. Thankfully, after the ring exchange and a passionate kiss between the newlyweds, the wedding ceremony finally ended at 3 in the afternoon. Wow! Who knew Jonathan had such a fiery side to him? Guess I was just too reserved back then, Lucian teased as he gazed at Roxanne. To the latter, however, the first kisses between newlyweds were always the most romantic and beautiful. When Roxanne turned around, Lucian suddenly pulled her into his arms and kissed her fervently. Needless to say, the woman was taken aback. "Oh my! Thank goodness we're watching the ceremony from backstage, so there aren't many people around. Otherwise, what would they say about an old married couple like us behaving so intimately?" Soon, it was time for the wedding reception. Lucian and Roxanne had initially planned on staying for the entire course, but as luck would have it, Bill called to inform them of the latest case developments. Despite the building anxiety, Roxanne composed herself and waited for their turn to toast the newlyweds. As soon as the happy couple appeared, Lucian and Roxanne congratulated them and showered them with loving wishes and blessings. After the toast, Lucian promptly pulled Jonathan aside and whispered something into his ear. Fortunately, the latter was very understanding and expressed his approval. At the same time, Roxanne turned to Lorraine. Madam Xander, my parents will be bringing the children over in a while. I'll have to leave them in your care." Zachary and Henrietta, too, nodded their heads and reassured Roxanne that everything would be fine. Roxanne, there's not much left to do for the rest of the reception. Why don't you go off first if you have something on? Don't worry. Your kids will be in good hands. After all, I'm their godmother. Madeline piped up. Upon hearing that, Roxanne felt even more at ease and immediately left for the police station with Lucian. Bill, who had long been waiting for them at the entrance, hurriedly approached their car when he saw them driving in. After Winnie was released, we found something puzzling about one of her recent activities. She called her daughter, Juliana, who had apparently hired a few men and are now on their way to Chronicles, Bill reported. That's all the information I got. Roxanne's heart began thudding in her chest. Do you think Winnie's trying to destroy the evidence? In other words, her previous quarrel with Grant might not have been an ordinary confrontation. She went to him because there was evidence left in the Jarvis residence, Lucian said. Bill nodded in affirmation. In that case, who could Juliana have hired? Roxanne asked curiously. Bill and Lucian exchanged knowing looks. Lucian narrowed his eyes ever so slightly and said, if I'm not wrong, she must have hired private investigators to destroy the evidence. As expected of Mr. Farwell. That's what I thought too. Bill replied, albeit with a hint of hesitation. But why would Winnie do something so reckless when she has just been investigated? That's a far cry from the calm demeanor during her questioning. Could she be intentionally diverting our attention to the Jarvis residence? Even if that's her plan, it doesn't matter. I have enough people to watch over them. The only one who'd work with her at this juncture is her son, Joseph Jarvis. Lucian muttered. With that, he called Caden and ordered him to put 20 bodyguards at Bill's disposal. Even though Bill was highly respected and wielded a good deal of authority in the police station, the fact that he was retired meant that he didn't have the power to deploy officers at the drop of a hat. From the looks of it, we haven't searched thoroughly enough for my mother's heirloom. Mr. Chapman, I shall return to the Jarvis residence with Lucian to look around again. Roxanne was getting increasingly anxious. Bill nodded and watched as the couple sped away in their car. Not long after, Caden brought a team of men to the station as instructed. Pleased with the turnout, Bill smiled and instantly got down to work. Meanwhile, in a mansion on the outskirts, Winnie was pacing about restlessly and checking her phone for the time almost every other minute. Joseph, on the contrary, could only lay on the couch, unable to move because both his arms were in a cast. Ugh! I hate Lucian Farwell. He could have hit me anywhere, yet he just had to break my arms. I can't even use my phone or play cards now. Upon seeing how uneasy his mother was, Joseph couldn't help but sigh. Mom, don't you think you're worrying unduly? You were so calm and steady at the police station. Why are you so scared now that you're back? You know nothing. I'm worried that whatever Roxanne's mother left behind might contain evidence of our crimes. Winnie fumed as she glared at her son. For a moment, Joseph was shocked, but he quickly got over it and grew cold as ice. What evidence? That has nothing to do with me. I don't even remember having taken part in anything. You were the one responsible for poisoning Roxanne's mother to death. Needless to say, Winnie was furious at how her son was acting so frivolously. Oh, the audacity! Does he not know what I've done for him? Only did what I did for him and his sister. That's it. It's time to lay my cards on the table. Oh, you were a part of it, Winnie muttered as she fixed a steely gaze upon her son. In fact, you were the one who carried out the deed. Joseph was so stunned at his mother's claims that he would have jumped from the couch if it weren't for his broken arms. Don't spout nonsense, Mom, he retorted. I was only 5 years old then, for goodness sake. How would I have helped you murder someone at that age? You should turn yourself in if you're so scared. That, unfortunately, was the last straw for Winnie. Without a second thought, she rushed up to Joseph and slapped him hard across the cheek. It's just my luck to have a son as useless as you. Why is my life so full of suffering? I want you out of my sight once your sister is back. As she yelled before bursting into tears. Seeing his mother racked with sobs, Yosef gritted his teeth and tamped down his irritation. That's enough. Why are you crying when you were the one who slapped me? Anyway, Juliana's almost home. It'd be better to have her help you since I can't do much in my current condition." Just then, the sound of car horns rang out from the courtyard. Stop crying, Mom. I think Juliana's back." Winnie's sobs stopped abruptly as she dabbed away the tears she had so painstakingly squeezed out for the act. She rushed down the stairs to welcome her beloved daughter. Sure enough, Juliana had arrived home with 4 strangers in tow. The men were in all shapes and sizes, yet they were so ordinarily bland that no one on the streets would give them a second look. That characteristic, however, was what gave them the best cover. After all, their job entailed helping wealthy folks tackle some of the trickiest cases, from investigating a homewrecker to catching a cheating spouse in the act. Winnie's face lit up when she finally saw Juliana, but the same couldn't be said for the latter. Mom, you'd better be careful," Juliana muttered sternly as she marched into the living room with the 4 men following behind. You've just been released from the police station, so I'm sure your every move will be monitored. You haven't gone out, have you?" At first, Winnie shook her head, but it didn't take long before she started squirming under her daughter's stare. I did go out for a while last night. Will I really be followed? The police don't have any evidence, though." Juliana's face instantly turned black as thunder. What makes you think you'll be safe outside? Tell me. Where on earth did you go? Do you think Roxanne will let you off the hook that easily?" Stunned by how grim Juliana was, Winnie began to regret her own actions. I was going to go to the Jarvis residence, but in the end, I got so worried that I passed by it without stopping. That isn't enough to expose me, is it?" After treating the 4 private investigators to a feast and drinks, Winnie went upstairs with Juliana to have a discussion with her. Upon seeing how miserable her brother was, Juliana gritted her teeth in frustration. Roxanne is trying to wipe us out completely, but she seems to have forgotten that cornered animals are the most dangerous. If she keeps pushing us into a corner, we can hold her 3 children hostage." A vicious glint flashed across Juliana's eyes. From what Winnie had said, she could understand how a mother's worry could be used against her. The best course of action now is to find a way to leave Horrington first. Once we arrive in Girton, we can consider going abroad. Juliana's initial plan was to get her hands on Roxanne's mother's heirloom, but looking at the situation, she might not be able to do that at this point. But it's obvious that the cops are after us. It won't be easy for us to leave Horrington." Wynne looked worried. Juliana nodded. Suddenly, her lips quirked up as an idea popped into her mind. As night fell, Roxanne and Lucian arrived at the Jarvis residence. Bill led a team of cops, equipped with professional search gear, to thoroughly search the premises inside and out in an effort to locate the family heirloom. The bodyguards Lucian arranged were also actively digging in the courtyard. They dug deeper than their previous attempt, and soon, they reached a depth of about 6 feet. Roxanne continued frowning as she tried to figure out what her mother's heirloom was. She went over her childhood memories, attempting to find any clues that might be related to her mother's daily habits, but to no avail. The heirloom remained elusive despite the professional and thorough search. The fact that Winnie had failed to locate it for years made Roxanne wonder if the heirloom was just a figment of their imagination. Just then, Bill came in from the courtyard. "I've searched everywhere in the Jarvis residence and received some feedback from the neighbors around. Based on my findings, it's unlikely that the heirloom is in the yard. It's more likely that it's still inside the house." Where would it be then? Roxanne took a sidelong glance at the building. There are only a few things left in the house, and they have combed through every possible hiding place. Where else could the heirloom be? Lucian cautiously observed as he walked up the stairs, hoping to discover a hidden compartment. Just when everyone was feeling a little defeated, Bill's phone rang. It was a call from the head of the bodyguards that Lucian had arranged for him. The head said, "Mr. Chapman, I've got an update for you. Juliana has been living in the mansion since she returned."
A car drove out not long ago, and we're following it now. Great. Don't lose them. There are still people in the mansion, right? Keep an eye on them. They can't possibly rely only on one car. Bill ordered. After being reassured by the head of the bodyguards, Bill hung up the phone. Bill turned his attention to Lucian and Roxanne and nodded. Winnie seems to be making a move now. There are two things they might do: destroy the evidence or escape. Roxanne's expression changed. Escape? Does that mean they no longer want to sell the mansion? I believe so. When I told Caden to negotiate the house deal with them, Winnie seemed anxious at first, but after being questioned by the cops, she seemed less concerned about the sale. The change in her behavior might suggest that money is no longer a priority for her. She must be the culprit. Lucian uttered firmly. A glint flashed across his eyes. But I won't let her slip through my fingers, not in Horrington or anywhere else.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.